It's raining in Birmingham, Alabama, and you're bored. What can you do today? What can you do in this soup? Hey, I have a great idea. Why don't you come visit the Birmingham Museum of Art? I guarantee you will be entertained, educated, and exercised. If that sounds like a plan, let me stock you up on some terms and definitions you might find useful as you wander the BMA halls discovering what you like. Okay. You'll see abstract paintings in the modern art section. These will be works of art that don't represent anything. They're just lines, colors, patterns that may make you feel happy or perplexed or sad or very confused. Attributes are characteristics or keys or clues that help you figure out who the person is that you're looking at. For instance, if you were raised in the Christian tradition, you can look at this old guy. You can see a halo, so he's probably a holy man, Bible in his hand, and that great big key probably indicates he has the keys to the kingdom of heaven and is St. Peter. Or here's a young man with a halo, a crown of thorns, pierced hands, the vinegar sponge that was used in the crucifixion, and from these attributes you know that it is the crucified Christ. Chiaroscuro is when an artist uses light and darkness in his painting to make it seem more real or to give it drama. This is a painting of Judith right before she saws off the head of Holofernes, and the use of chiaroscuro in this painting is where she is illuminated almost like with a spotlight on her face and her chest and her arm that's holding the sword that she's going to use to do the deed. The next term is chronology, which simply means how old is the piece. The example I've used I really like because it's a Japanese jar from the Jomon period, which was made in 3000 BC or 5,000 years ago. This was before Stonehenge. This was before horses were domesticated. This was before the pyramids were built. The next term is color, which we all pretty much know what that is, but you may not know that tone refers to the amount of lightness or darkness in a color, and saturation refers to how bright it is. For instance, in this field, those bright reds and yellows are really saturated colors, but the buildings in the background are more muted or darker in tone. Take a look at these glass pieces in the lobby of the Birmingham Museum of Art. Now that's saturation. That is bright color. Composition is just the arrangement that the artist uses to get his point across. It can create movement, as in this painting of Perseus armed by Mercury and Minerva. Look at their arms. Look how they go up and down and up and down, and they just lead your eye all the way across the painting. Up and down, all the way across, and that's composition. So composition can create movement, as we just saw, but it also can create a mood. Take a look at this Indian on the horse and the way it's composed. Everything is headed downward. The head goes down, the head of the horse goes down, and it creates a melancholy, sad feeling because of the way it's composed. Did you color as a kid? Did you color outside the lines? Or did you color within the lines? Well, those lines are contour lines, and they're solid lines that create a picture, like this coloring page of the cat and the moon. Now take a look at this modern art painting called Flin Flon 6. that uses light contour lines to form the pattern and create the image. What if we made those contour lines dark? Do you feel that the painting is no longer as happy and bright and fun as it was? It's no longer Flin Flon 6. The next term is contrapposto, which refers to a person having his weight mainly on one leg, and with his body turned a little. Why do they do this? It makes a more dynamic, interesting figure, and it also conveys movement, obviously, more than if the person was equally weighted on both legs. The next term, foreshortening, is when a body part, usually an arm or a leg or a hand or a foot, is smaller or larger depending on where it is in the scene. So if it's closer to you, then it's going to be larger. In this instance, with Hagar and the angel, look at the pointing arm. See, it's smaller than what it would be normally, and that gives the feeling of depth within the painting. The next term is form, which is just simply the perceived space that something takes up. It can be two-dimensional or it can be three-dimensional. Three-dimensional form is like in a sculpture where you can actually walk around the object. There's a front and there's a back, and you can go all the way around it. Two-dimensional form is on a flat surface, like a painting. This two-dimensional painting of the goddess Aurora by the artist Bouguereau appears to have a solid form as she dances around in the morning light. Fresco was a type of painting that the old masters like Michelangelo used on the Sistine Chapel, in which they applied the pigment to plaster, either wet or dry plaster. If you're using wet plaster, it gives the term "you better work fast" a whole new meaning, doesn't it? Genre art doesn't depict kings and queens and lords and ladies. It depicts us common, everyday people. How cool is this genre painting by Edmonds that shows a very uncomfortable older man who's trying to propose to a younger woman who is having none of it? This is a Dutch genre painting showing some of the Dutch customs of the Epiphany and showing the people that you would see during that time. Hierarchy of scale means that the more important you are, the bigger you're portrayed. Take a look at the hierarchy of scale with this really large Madonna and these little bitty saints and these little bitty angels. We know who's important in this painting. Here's another one with a large Buddha. Next to him are his helpers, who are a little bit smaller, and then at the feet and the base are the smallest in scale, the monks. Iconography is used in religious art. It's when an object that you see in the artwork symbolizes or stands for a concept or a trait that is commonly understood by the followers of that. Let's take a look at the symbols used in this painting of the Madonna enthroned with the two female saints at her feet. Both of the saints are martyrs. How do we know that? It's because they both have palm fronds in their hands, which is a symbol for martyrdom. Also, the Christ child is holding a crown over one of their heads, which is also a symbol of the glory of martyrdom. The angels have lilies and roses. The lilies are a symbol of purity, and the roses are a symbol of the nativity. The next term, landscape, refers to a piece of art that shows a natural setting that's usually outside. If people are shown in the landscape, they're usually smaller, and the emphasis is on the natural beauty of the land rather than what the people are doing. The term medium just means what is the material made of. It can be an artwork made in stained glass, or it can be an artwork that is made in clay by a potter like Josiah Wedgwood, or the medium could be oil on canvas. Did you think I abandoned you? The next thing we're going to talk about is how to make oil paint. You need three things: pigment, which is the color, oil, which acts as a binder, and some type of thinner so that you can control the thickness of the paint. The next term is orthogonal lines, which sound really complex, don't they? But it just means the vanishing lines that makes the painting seem like it has depth. Look at these orthogonal lines in Englehart's church in the background, just right by the steeple, where they come together and make the church look near, and the mountains and the stream behind it, they look like they're far away. In this painting of the Yosemite Valley by Bierstadt, you can see the orthogonal line that is made by the mountain range as it meets the horizontal line right where the sun comes out. And that gives the painting a feeling of depth. Perspective is using size and line to create a three-dimensional effect. So objects that are nearer to you are going to be larger, and objects that are smaller are going to seem like they're farther away. Canaletto's view of the Grand Canal in Venice is another really good example of perspective. The buildings that seem nearer to us are larger, and then they get smaller and smaller and smaller as the canal and the buildings get farther and farther away. A print is artwork on paper that is usually produced many, many times. So what you're seeing is not the original, but a print or a facsimile of the original. Proportion deals with size relationships. They can be parts of the body, or it can be the size of objects. Now take a look at Botero's reclining nude and her proportions, which are exaggerated. Obviously, she doesn't worry about the amount of calories in French fries. The term relief is a term used in sculpture, and it describes how much detail extends from the background or the flat surface of the sculpture. For instance, in the Wedgwood, the cameo is low relief. The detail doesn't stick out very much. And the Medusa is high relief. The detail sticks way out from the background. In this 14th century Italian relief of a female saint, everything is pretty much in bas relief or low relief except her head and her hand, which really stand out, and those are high relief. In the term school, think of a group of fish rather than a place where you go to learn. A school is a group of artists whose work and ideas have a common trait. As in the example I used here is Robert Henry's Laughing Boy, which is from the Ashcan School. The next term, style, is a recognizable manner of creating art. And there are three types of style. The first is period style. Take our friend the Japanese vase from 3000 BC. All of the vases from this period had very similar traits or styles. Regional style are traits that are characteristic of a certain region. For instance, an expert on Native American beadwork could take a look at these moccasins and say, "Oh, Lakota Sioux from South Dakota." The last element of style is personal style, which is a unique manner of doing something. We know that's the Queen of England because she always wears a hat. We would guess that this is a sculpture by Frederick Remington because it has to do with the West and usually the period of the Civil War or the time of the cowboys. A symbol is usually a solid recognizable subject that stands for or symbolizes something that would be hard to show in a picture or sculpture. For instance, when we see this sign, it's a symbol that means we know to stop the car, to cease moving. Now let's look at the symbols seen in this allegory concerning Mr. and Mrs. Charles I, whose theme says, "You may be King of England, but in the big picture that doesn't mean a thing." This little Cupid symbolizing love holds a tray of bubbles, which symbolize the impermanence of love because they pop and don't last very long. Two symbols of death here are obviously the skull, and also, if you look to the far right, the candle that is just sputtering out. I love this picture of Cornelia Hardy, whose eyes to me look like they're pleading about something. What could that symbolize? Take a look at the little group of flowers pinned to her chest. Do you know what those are? They're forget-me-nots. Technique is the distinctive way an artist does his thing, makes his art, uses his tools and materials. For instance, the technique used by Claude Monet, who is the king of the Impressionists, is to use little dabs of paint in his brush strokes, dab, 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 layer after layer. Texture is the perceived surface quality. What would it feel like if we touched it? Would it be rough? Would it be smooth? Take a look at this example. On the left, the bark we would think would feel rough, whereas the satin, if we were able to feel it, would feel smooth. So rough texture, smooth texture. Now, texture can refer to the actual painting itself and how much paint the artist has built up on the surface of his work. For instance, this painting of the village of Aragne by Camille Pissarro, you can see how he has built up his paint. But texture can also be implied by the skill of the artist. For instance, in this painting by Merrill of the sorceress, look at the texture of her garments, how filmy and light feeling it seems like if you touched them that they would be. Tempera is an older style of painting that was used before oil painting. How do you make it? You use color and you use egg yolk. Sometimes you can use glue or a casein, which will make it dry quickly. This is one of my favorite paintings, and it's from the workshop of Ghirlandaio, who lived in the 1550s. It's done in tempera on a panel. Trompe-l'oeil, say that word 3 times fast, is a technique of realism in which the objects look so real that you can just almost reach out and touch them. Take a look at the dried leaves in this vase. See how real they look? They just look three-dimensional. You can just almost reach out and feel the texture and feel the leaves themselves. They look so realistic. And this is trompe-l'oeil. Now, if applying is learning, let's see how many terms that we've learned we can apply to this painting of Moonlight in Virginia. And in conclusion, I just want to point out that the examples I've used here are only a fraction of the thousands and thousands of pieces of art that are on exhibit at the Birmingham Museum of Art. And remember, the cost of getting in